good afternoon. I don't know if the mics are working or not, but in the interest of time, just so you know that you're in the right place, and most importantly to know that I'm in the right place. This panel is a student displaced by disaster stories from the ground. The students displaced by disaster out here. So we're going to have a great session here. I want to make it a little bit more interactive in kind of that sense. We have some prepared remarks that people have out here. And so basically what I'm going to start off is by introducing myself first. And one of the questions, the first question just to start off as we do the introduction, is to share with the audience how you ended up here today. Because I think that tells volumes about what we're trying to accomplish as a RISE platform in terms of that. So briefly, tell me your name, who you are, and how you ended up out here today, and then we'll start kind of like opening up the panel with your initial remarks out here. I'm going to try to keep the time out here, but very interesting studies out here. So I'm Fernando Rivera. I'm a professor of sociology and director of the Puerto Rico Research Hub at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Kind of like how I ended up here, this is sort of relationships, right? And networks that start. I went to school in Maya West as an undergrad with Marla. Avidan Rodriguez was my first professor of sociology in Maya West back in the day. Avidan was the first person that gave me a job at the Applied Center for Social Research in Maya West, and we have kept up those networks out here. So fast forward 20 years, here we are. In terms of that, but that tells you a sense of those relationships that take time to build and foster, and you build that trust. And I think that's sort of at the end of the day what for at least this RISE platform should become in the future. So I'm going to pass it around. So introduce yourself.
Well, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Yo soy Yarianta Riva. I went to Florida International University. I'm from Miami. And it's interesting that being from Miami, I have been here at the University at Albany as a professor for the past 28 years. So I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology, but for the last 6 years I've been a dean here at the university. First dean of undergraduate education, and now I'm the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, interim dean. So within the last year, Marla and Cecilio were here visiting our campus. And they said, oh, you should meet, they told them, you should meet the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And I don't think that they knew that we had more in common than being just here in Albany at a certain moment. So we started talking, and they're so delightful. And I can remember at the end of the meeting, my first meeting with them, I said, if I knew who you were, that you were coming, I would have brought merenguito y guayaba. Very nice afternoon. So I think it was a mutual surprise, but they understood how much I work with students and student success, and so they invited me to the panel.
Buenas tardes, gracias a todos por estar aquí. Good afternoon, I thank you all for being here. My name is Adriana Castillo. I am a senior undergraduate student at Arizona State University. And the way that I ended up here is because I studied before at the University of Puerto Rico Maya West campus. And I studied political science. I took a class called Public Opinion with Cecilio Ortiz. And after that, that class changed my life and my approach in politics and how I wanted to do policy. And I ended up working with Professor Marla and Cecilio in their institute in the university. And that led to me changing to Arizona State University after Hurricane Maria. And that's why I'm displaced.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. My name is Melissa Morales. I am the Assistant Director of Admissions in San Antonio. However, the reason why I'm here was kind of like it was not intentional. Back in March, I sent an email out to Marla Perez, who was my first professor in Colegio de Maya West. I'm also UPR Maya West graduate. And I wanted to say thank you because, 10 years later, something popped up from her class, and I felt the need to tell her, like, hey, I remember I learned that in your class, and I just wanted to let you know that, 10 years later, you're still impacting my life. And that, if anyone knows Marla, she will pull you aside and tell you what are you doing with your life. And when I told her what my role was and what I've been experiencing, she popped up, oh, by the way, I'm going to send you something about RISE. It's called RISE, and let me know what you think. And that immediately popped up. My experience working with welcoming students and helping them transfer in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. These students actually came to the city of San Antonio on their own with no connection or support from their faculty back home. They just needed to move because they could no longer sustain themselves in Puerto Rico. So they found family in San Antonio that would welcome them, and they landed in my offices as an intervention counselor at that time, and basically navigating the hurdles of not having a system in place is why I'm here.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Víctor Luis Avilés, soy estudiante de Arizona State University, graduado en Environmental Social Sciences. Y estoy aquí, primero, ¿verdad? Conocí a la doctora Marla Pérez Lugo en la clase de Sociología Ambiental, una clase que impactó grandemente, ¿verdad?, mis aspiraciones a futuro en términos de lo que quería dentro de mi grado académico. Y pues soy un estudiante que fue desplazado, ¿verdad?, durante la crisis acrecentada por el huracán María. Y digo crisis acrecentada porque María fue simplemente un punto dentro del desastre y una continuidad de lo que ya estaba sucediendo en el país, en Puerto Rico, en términos económicos, de infraestructura y de la población en general. Mucho.
Yeah. Victor Ruiz Aves is University of Arizona. He's also one of the displaced students and has come after Hurricane Maria. Yep. And it impacted your life because, I'm sorry, if you could, we could
básicamente por el huracán impactó, bueno, cuando el huracán impacta, acrecenta la crisis ya existente en el país.
So how the hurricane has affected life and this crisis.
Basically, that the impact of Hurricane Maria was much more beyond than the event. There were already existential environmental conditions that exacerbated the condition.
All right, thank you everyone for that. And we had some guiding kind of questions, but we can deviate from those. But it's basically your experience dealing with students, your experience as a student. Some of the, what were some of the issues that you learned, what you found was a little bit concerning or not, and what structural changes should we promote in order to serve displaced students a little bit better in terms of that. So I'm just going to briefly start, and then we can just, 10 minutes each panelist in terms of that. So, cada persona. So, in terms of looking at that, and I was reflecting a little bit about what all the panelists and the presenters are saying. I think in a way, what's happening today was already is sort of what's happening is happening in a sense, but at a very micro level, right? I think sort of in the introduction of each one, that platform is there, right? It's sort of kind of like that connectivity that we have in terms of connections to a specific personal sort of things, right? But how do we translate that from the individual level? And I'm a sociologist, so I always look at sort of the structural level. So how do we move from this individual networks into more structural networks to deal with the realities that we have right now? And we were asked this morning, to actually address all those grand challenges that we have, right? And I think we have a lot of grand challenges, and I put it in quotes because they happen every day, right? We have issues of poverty, we have issues of immigration policy, we have issues of crime, we have issues of losing your job at any time, we have the issues of health. All of us are health emergency away from going into bankruptcy. So those usually we think about these grand schemes of kind of like a hurricane with a tornado and a nuclear disaster, just like it happened in Japan, and sort of creating that new normal. But how do we translate that into the everyday things that we need to account for, and kind of like have that platform out there in terms out there. And obviously, in the disaster context, right, or the hazard type of context, those kind of like extreme events, that actually what they do is just exacerbate what was there before the actual event. So I think we need to kind of like shift this mentality that we need to wait for the event to start mobilizing and doing action, right? And that's just through meaning of resiliency, right, in terms of that. And I think from sort of even the keynote that we just had, in terms of, it's a great opportunity here, but I think for me resiliency is not going back to what we were, but actually an opportunity to leap forward in terms of that. And one of the things, so C. Wright Mills is a sociologist, and he stated that there's an interconnection between biography and how you understand social phenomena. I think that's one of the great things that we learn in terms of how do I learn from my experience, how do I learn from my biography, and not be shy about my biography and what I can bring to the table in terms of the scientific discovery. Because a lot of times in academia, we sort of negated some of what that knowledge that you have based on your biography, just based on where you happen to live and the experiences that you have, and how can that make a better a scholar in that sense out here. I have some of my students out here from UCF that some of them were displaced by the storm, and so kind of like in terms of so I don't want to be sort of saying about the problems, but actually sort of the solutions right here. And I think one of the things that for me, and I don't know if you know, but we sort of created a Puerto Rico research hub, right? What is a Puerto Rico research hub? It's a center of activities dedicated to Puerto Rico at the University of Central Florida. But we should have had this hub, or whatever I was allowed to call it, a long time ago. And I think that's what we need to, I challenge you in your universities as students, as faculty, as staff, to really understand what are the communities inside and outside of the university, and how as institutions of higher learning we're responding to the needs of those communities, right? It's almost sad, right, that we had Maria and then we had Dorian, and the same sort of mistakes that we made during Maria were made, at least in my perspective, in my viewpoint, with our brothers and sisters from Bahamas. It was kind of like the same tragic change of events, right? All right, how are we going to react? It takes 2 days before we really sort of say, well, what's going to be, what are we going to do? What nonprofit we're going to trust? How do we help? All those type of things. That's unacceptable, right? That's simply unacceptable. And I think that at least for me, rises this great hope that institutions of higher learning, we don't have to go through that exercise because we do all this work all the time, right? But we need to establish kind of like those connections out here. I know that, that there should be a Venezuelan research hub at UCF. Because, we get into the context of different things, Eventually, this is a population that is happening over here. Other Latin American countries and all sorts of stuff. So how do we prepare ourselves out here? And how do we use the intellectual capital that we have? And we sort of kind of like benefit more people in terms of that. And, the immediate context, obviously, in the university students. But also, utilizing those assets that actually students bring out here and building that platform for the future. So, I'm gonna shut myself because I'm the moderator, so I'm gonna pass it on.
So as I mentioned, I'm overseeing the College of Arts and Sciences here at the University at Albany. But I can tell you that I have had direct experience with natural disaster. So I grew up in Hialeah. Anybody know Hialeah? I'm from Hialeah, actually. No, I'm a Cuban from Hialeah, so for full disclosure. And so I lived through the time of hurricanes, obviously, living in Miami. So Hurricane Hugo, I remember very vividly, and that notion that even though I was in my home still, there was no school, there was no light, there was no water, all the issues that we had to live through. And for someone who liked school and wanted to be in school, we thought we were really missing a lot in terms of our education and all the other feelings and anxiety and everything that provokes. Many years later, it was quite interesting. I was in Massachusetts at Amherst for a couple of years, and I was moving to Albany. And my parents, you know how parents are, right? They were coming to help me move. So they were coming to help me move, and I had everything lined up. I'm in Massachusetts, and a hurricane hits in Miami. And now my parents can't get out. They can't leave. The airport is closed. They can't come up, you know, and so it was just an interesting parallel that I was in my apartment. Notice how interesting. I had everything packed. I didn't even have something, you know, I had something deep with unpacked, but it was this feeling like I'm here and I'm suffering the hurricane too because I'm paralyzed. I can't move. Everything's turned off. I'm expecting everything was very in order and time. And it really made me think what it is to live without all the basic necessities, everything you take for granted, how you feel about that, and you can't really go anywhere. My parents couldn't go anywhere, and there we were. And so just all of that, all of the ideas, all of the notions of what you've lost, how do you recover, when does it all come back, what have you taken for granted. So I've been thinking about those things as I put this together, and I thought that I would share with you some ideas of what could be a framework that we could think about, and this is now given the more current situation. So we start with an example. We here at Albany, obviously Avidan was here, and he had all this interest in the students, and one particular student came to my attention as undergraduate dean. So the student was displaced after the hurricane, and she had been studying physics and was interested in our program in atmospheric and environmental sciences, and interestingly, that's one of my programs now in the College of Arts and Sciences. So we reached out to her. We wanted to transfer her here to Albany, to our department. She was 1 semester away from graduation. So she had 90 credits completed. At the University of Puerto Rico with 90 credits, 1 semester away. Clearly, it wasn't going to all come back the way that she needed to finish and graduate. And you know, you felt it, me dio mucho sentimiento, because here's a student who's getting ready to graduate. All that time, all your friends, you know, everything you envisioned you were going to graduate, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen right away. It's not going to, who knows when it's going to happen. So they reached out to me as undergraduate dean. One of the problems we had was to evaluate the coursework, and this is part of the preparedness. And I was talking to a few people this morning. We have to make sure that for students, their records are accessible before, during, and after the situation. Whether they live in a cloud in some secure fashion, how do you access the records? Because the problem we had here was trying to figure out what courses had been taken, what they served as, what credit to give that person, and how to transfer the credits, and which of our departments or majors or programs. There was a difficulty obtaining the transcript, obtaining the credits for the student. So that was one thing, because we didn't have it situated. What do you do? Clearly the notion of tuition. Now, what are they going to live from? What is the tuition? In this particular example, this was a real example, we had some monies that we were able to afford to the student for tuition and consider their living expenses here on our campus. But all of these things happened Don't think that they happen in any organized way. We spent quite a bit of time thinking, what do we do? And who does it? The dean, the department, the registrar, who's involved? We spent time that she really didn't have, right? We spent time trying to figure out how to organize ourselves and what we were going to do to be able to help this student. We did not have, and I'll tell you, for a university of our size and our experiences, because we've had natural disaster in New York State, we did not have a protocol in place to know exactly how to help this student. On top of the fact, the student, of course, felt a tremendous amount of anxiety through the whole process. Because the question is, if I go to Albany, will I in fact finish? Will they in fact take my credits? How much more time is it going to take? And that's a higher level anxiety, and the anxiety of, who are those teachers? How is that class? How do I integrate again? So for this particular student, we knew that there was a certain amount of culture shock. Life was very different with or without the disaster than what they're experiencing here in the United States. Homesickness, right? So your country is your country, your life is your life. And even though you have this idea, but you didn't prepare to think that you were going to finish your degree in another country or another place, in the mainland, you didn't think that that's what was going to happen. That you never had that idea. So you had to think of that idea and the depression that followed, right? So on top of all the things you have to do in terms of paper and all of the work, you also have to think of the individual as a person, their mental health, their ability to reintegrate, what their needs are. And this is I'm giving you a very general description because every individual has their own situation. So let me tell you then that she did complete her degree here at the university, right? This is good. This was the positive outcome. She finished. She got her Bachelor's of Science here in 2018. Very good student because she is a student now at one of the top universities here in the U.S. She went to University of Michigan, of course. Resilience, right? We heard resilience. She wasn't going to stop, but it wasn't easy. But she was able to, it could have been facilitated had we had something in place. So what did we learn in the process? What do we need to do in our preparation? And this is a big theme of talking of education and talking about our students. And originally I titled this, being student-centered. Our talk is student-centered. What are the best practices? How do we develop that guideline? How do we share that easily? How do we create a more positive, smooth transfer experience? I'll tell you that at the beginning of her process, the university thought, well, is this kind of like setting up a study abroad? So they went down that road for a little while. It's like, it's not really exactly a study. She did not elect to come here. This is so really doesn't. So we didn't really even have a place of how to think about that. And that led to that confusion. The entire university community ultimately must be involved. Our university here today is over 17,000 students. So we have a lot of students here. It's a big campus that we have, and many different parts it takes to sort of move one student through the pipeline. So the whole community needs to be involved. The notion of emergency funding. Do we actually have funding to be able to apportion, have students apply in particular circumstances? Institutions should have something like this. There could be a variety of reasons. It could be a typical example. Someone set unintentionally a fire in a dormitory. Now you have students displaced from a dormitory. This is a disaster. Sometimes they lose everything in that process. But we haven't learned enough from that to have protocols in place, emergency funding. 2 minutes. Forms and procedures. So these things begin, and what is the process? So we can have a process. But in a sense, what would be the forms that you would need? How do we make that easy? How do we make that as simple as possible? What's the essence of the information? We need to transfer those things, to register that student, to put in the student and put them in the system. How can we facilitate that? We really didn't have these kinds of processes. Certain types of insurance, clearly, because the student is here, doesn't necessarily mean they might not fall ill for some reason, and it could be an unrelated reason. We have to think about the insurance for our students. And we know also that this now becomes a student that we want to make sure that FEMA is involved and knows of the students. So very quickly in my last minute, the framework. I conceptualized the framework that moves from preparedness through recovery. From preparedness all the way through recovery. And the idea is that we can't wait for these things to happen to then put the protocol in place. How do we start preparing right now in the whole process? The two main areas of function for preparedness here are really the two main that really affect a student-centered approach. Academic affairs, all the functions and procedures for academic success, hand in hand with student affairs. The academic affairs, your faculty, your departments, what it takes to get through an academic program. Your student affairs, everything that is co-curricular. The registrar's office, their living, their food, their shelter. Developing short-term and long-term protocols. I see it all as a continuum. You know, from beginning to end. What do you do very quickly in the short term and how does it develop? There are parallels in the aftermath of recovery in the same way. Academic affairs and student affairs. What goes into action? Who's involved? And it's a long list in an institution of individuals that should be a coordinated effort. And finally, we have to think about the basic needs assessment. So we can think about the academics, but these are people. Adequate food. We now have a food pantry here on our campus, accessible by the students. Our dormitories are shelter. Mental health counseling assistance. Is that in place? Do we have the counselors? Do we have individuals who can deal with individuals in crisis from these types of crises? Then we should have the training and have people prepared and ready for that. Something basic as clothing and school supplies. And where are our peers? Peers really serve a very important function to move our students along. So finally, just to wrap up, there are a number of best practices. These are the things that inform the framework of preparedness and recovery. In these particular areas of what your current students can do, they can be preparing for this, engaging in research, service learning projects. We heard about that this morning with the panel. All the different types of workshops, specific courses that the whole community can get involved with emergency preparedness. Thank you.
I don't have a presentation, but I want to stand up. So.
Perfect.
So when I got the invitation to do my presentation here today, the first question was, what was my experience with students displaced? And I laughed because I am a student displaced. And I just thought about exactly the day that I made the decision. And I just saw a friend when I was at the University of Puerto Rico on campus. I didn't have electricity in my house. I didn't have water in my house. I didn't have signal on my phone. But I was at the university because the university was open. So I saw my friend. She had signal on her phone, and she said, I'm going to Arizona State University, and I'm going to do my doctorate degree. And I'm like, what? You're going there? I'm desperate. I want to leave. I want to go. Because I knew that I wanted to quit. I was tired of trying to deal with my academics and also trying to deal with the daily struggles of disaster. So I called Marla and I told her, I want to go to Arizona State University, put my name. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about the shock. I just really wanted to get out. But that was an opportunity that I had that I know that other groups, other friends, and other people in Puerto Rico didn't have. Why I bring this is because sometimes we talk about students that are now in the university and got the chance, but I feel like sometimes we forget about the ones that stayed in Puerto Rico. And that sometimes feels guilty because we went to a university, we got the resources, but then we're over there and we're like, I left my people, I left mi barrio, I left my friends. So I want to, after you leave this panel and you kind of reflect, think about that of Puerto Ricans on the island and then the Puerto Ricans that left. It becomes a duality in our lives. It becomes like a difficult path that we have to live now because we were displaced. There are 3 points that I want to stand out when we're living here in the States as a student displaced. And one of them is like the ignorance that we have, the ignorance that we face towards the Puerto Ricans being U.S. citizens. I had a really weird experience where they didn't accept my license because they say it wasn't a valid license, that it wasn't a U.S. license, it wasn't from Mexico, it wasn't from Canada, and I'm like, oh wow, so I'm not even a country, I'm not even a U.S. territory, you're gonna say no, you're not gonna use it. So I couldn't buy what I wanted to buy. I saw the news about the student at Purdue that they didn't let him buy medicine because also that it wasn't valid. So imagine me coming to a state, coming from a U.S. territory to a state, and not knowing that probably I would have to change my license so I didn't have to have the struggle of going around and not being able to enter to places or to buy things because my ID is not valid, when it is because I am from a U.S. territory. So I understand that maybe the person that is telling you that it's not valid, maybe it's the ignorance of that person, but I think, for example, if it's like a corporation or a pharmacy, or if it's, I don't know, a store, they don't have the ignorance that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. So what do I have to call the manager and tell them like, oh, you gotta train your people to understand that we are U.S. citizens? No, like, that's not my job, but then we are seeing this disparity that we as Puerto Ricans, when we get here, we're treated as like we are not U.S. citizens. And I think that when we are displacing students, we forget that that's something that can happen and is happening. And I feel like if you ask students, I'm seeing a lot of yeses here. So I feel like if you go around and you sit down and ask every Puerto